And good morning, everyone. This is the RoofTopSports. Thank you for coming over to this morning Mariners talk. Hopefully, I'm making your commute to your work easier unless you're already there. Maybe you're listening to it while you're at a warehouse. So anyways, appreciate it. And Steve, how are you doing?
I'm great, man. Just enjoying the enjoying the late morning, early afternoon here in the fighting town of Flint, Michigan. I'm still in pretty good spirits. Last night didn't necessarily go our way, but there's still tonight, and there's still an opportunity to win this series and put together two in a row and get this thing rolling the way it's supposed to roll.
Yeah, hopefully they can figure it out for today, which is actually this afternoon. They're going to play an afternoon game. I know it's tonight in your end, but that's okay. And hopefully they can figure this out. But before we even talk about this next game, we should talk about how this game went yesterday. And I know maybe you saw first half of it and then you went to sleep, then watched the highlights. However you did it, it works. But the Mariners unfortunately lost. It was by a score of, I believe it was 3-2. Yes, it was 3-2. Mariners had opportunities to win the entire time. Yep. Unfortunately, they blew it. It started with Logan Gilbert, absolute dominant performance, but tragically it was wasted. And then Victor Robles actually single-handedly scored a Mariners run, the very first one with his stolen base efforts. And then, unfortunately, the bullpen came in, and that was after Logan was pulled. And maybe like a few on my chat box yesterday questions say they should have let Logan go. But the thing is, I don't think it was necessarily much about the pitch counts. Now, if it was close to 100, would Dan Wilson have pulled him out? Probably, because everyone else kind of does it anyway. But he was kind of getting diced up a little bit in that final inning of his before he got away with it, because he did get out of a jam. Yep. And then it was the bullpen. JT Chargois and Colin Snyder uncharacteristically gave up home runs, including one of them to Jose Siri. So again, the Mariners are continuing to struggle against the more bottom tier kind of hitters. So Steve, any thoughts on the game that went on? And I haven't even talked about how bad the offense was.
This was, and I watched the first 5 innings last night before I finally decided to call it a night. For me, this was, yes, you can go ahead and blame the bullpen. JT Chargois did not have a good outing. Colin Snyder had an uncharacteristic outing as well too. So yeah, for the most part, you can say that. But for me, this was all on the offense. 1 run in 6 innings against a team, like Tampa Bay is just. I'll just say it, man. It's garbage. Like these results, especially after the first win, when you get 5 runs against Tampa and the ability to only score 1 through 6. And I think it was the bottom of the 6 where Victor Robles had a steal. And
he had a double steal.
Yeah, he had a double steal and eventually comes around to score. And to me, this was the inning where you can finally break through. And I think Cal Raleigh was on second. There was a throwing error, and then Randy Arozarena strikes out, and I believe that ended the inning. And it's the ability just to kind of keep the chain moving, taking advantage of the momentum that's in your favor. And and for me, the Mariners actually had that momentum, and I like the fact that they still were able to come away with 1. But in that situation, you kind of want to play add-on, understanding that this might be a low-scoring affair. And 3 runs are probably going to do it. You'd like to see the same amount of runs you got the night before. But just the ability to extend innings. And we were talking pre about how you'd like to see Dan Wilson, bench Arozarena for a game. I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with that, but it's just the overall hitting approach of, in that situation, I mean, I understand Randy Arozarena was brought in to hit home runs. I understand that. But when the home run is not there and you're not getting that inside fastball where you can get the bat head out and drive it, take advantage of what pitchers are willing to give you. And if that is, a grounder through the middle, a grounder with eyes, a little dink, a dork, you know what I mean? Just put it somewhere in the field to play, and just keep that chain moving and getting some momentum. and to strike out and to strike out in that moment really kind of put an end to the Mariner momentum last night. And then, of course, now you're putting your pitching staff in a position where they have to feel like they have to be perfect in order to keep a 1-run lead. And then, of course, once Tampa Bay got the 2, it was it. That was over. Like I know the Mariners had that nice little come from behind victory in Dan Wilson's first game, but more oftentimes than not, that's not gonna come to fruition with this team because of because of how this offense has been built. It's just not necessarily going to be that type of offense down the stretch. So you have to be able to get out in front. And we were saying it last night on the pregame show with Jay Trident. Was like, you're in a very good position against a young pitcher who's got a 5 ERA, and you can't allow these inexperienced pitchers to work ahead. You can't allow them to get momentum. Like, this is an opportunity where you should absolutely bludgeon these type of pitchers. And again, the Mariners just could not take advantage early, and unfortunately, it cost them.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, JT, what's his name? JT Springs, I think, or Jeffrey Springs, not JT Springs, unless his middle name has a T, so I'm correct. But Jeffrey Springs, 9 strikeouts, and he had a 4.50 ERA. Yeah. And of course, when you do that, when you have a game like that, you're not going to win. I mean, the only good thing out of that was I actually added him on my fantasy baseball team, and he inflated the stats on my team quite a bit. So that's kind of the reason why I'm winning. But besides the point, I mean, you also lost to, you kind of lost. It was kind of a low-key bullpen day too. And Mariners, at least, they only came up with 2 runs, and they should have came up with more. Right. And like other frustrating things, I think we saw some times where the Mariners are swinging when they're not supposed to, and then they're taking like a fastball. I think it was like Dylan Moore or Luke Raley had the same problem. I think it was Luke Raley in that bottom of the inning with 2 outs when he had the opportunity to win the game. He took a fastball right down the middle, but then he swings at something that's like on the verge of like hitting the dirt, which it pretty much did hit the dirt, and that's how he struck out.
Yeah, enough with this advanced analytics. Listen, I understand that the Mariners run, they're fueled by advanced analytics, but that being said, that this has to be the simplest approach possible. And you just mentioned that Dylan Moore at bat where you get a 4-seamer literally right down Broadway, and you're taking it for a strike. And now you put yourself in a position where you might have to be aggressive against a pitch that that you're probably not good at making contact on. But for me, what really pissed me off last night was 17 strikeouts. 17 strikeouts against a pitching staff that is not really a big strikeout type of pitching staff. Julio Rodriguez, 3 strikeouts, not going to cut it. Jorge Polanco, 3 strikeouts. Mitch Haniger, 2 strikeouts. Dylan Moore, 2 strikeouts. Luis Rivas, 2 strikeouts. These
Leo
are not
Rivas.
Leo Rivas. Sorry. What did I call him?
Luis Rivas.
Yeah, Luis Rivas.
Former Minnesota Twin.
Yeah, this is unacceptable. And you're talking about plate approach. And for me, it starts with Julio Rodriguez, and yeah, that's the thing. It's like, what's funny is William Cook here says, Julio's getting hard stuff inside and then spinning stuff away, but take advantage of the hard stuff inside. Like, one of the best traits about Julio Rodriguez is his bat speed, and he's got it in spades. And when he's cooking, it's when he's taking advantage of those inside strikeouts, right? Not necessarily in on the hands, but on the inner portion of the plate. He has the ability to get the bat head out in front and, make people pay. But this is also transcended of his entire Mariner career up to this point, where we've seen a lot of swing and misses on slider low and away, breaking ball low, and we've also this year seen the bad side of Julio where he can't connect with the fastball regardless. This was a perfect opportunity, but that being said, you look at how this lineup was constructed last night, and I know you got a lot to say on that as well too. Because you were very vocal last night about how you didn't like this lineup. And you were right. You were 100% right.
The other thing's alarming about Julio Rodriguez, he has now been 1 for his last 25, His last home run for the Mariners was back on July 20th, and he came back from injury on August 11th, and he has not been productive. Like, maybe he showed a little bit of it, like, before that 1 for 25, but he hasn't really done much since, and he certainly hasn't done much during the Dan Wilson era either, with the exception of a few walks. And if the Mariners are going to make the playoffs, they are going to have to do something with Julio Rodriguez, or at least Julio Rodriguez are going to have to step up. He's going to have to. Like, they need a streak out of him, like, and it just hasn't happened. Like, he hasn't had any kind of a streak this entire season that what you would say is noticeable. Like, for last year, August Julio Rodriguez was arguably the best player in baseball.
Best player in baseball, 100%. By the way, William Cook, in his rookie season, there were plenty of at-bats where Julio Rodriguez was flailing at slider loan away. As a matter of fact, he wasn't, in his first 6 weeks of his rookie year, he wasn't getting anything straight to hit until he finally broke out of it in the Miami series. But your point is still well taken. So now, is this going to be a situation where, Dan Wilson takes the Lou Piniella approach and just sits him for a day or two? Like, I understand that they, like, both Julio Rodriguez and Randy Arozarena have to be in this lineup for any chance of any mounted winning, like extended winning streaks. Is this like, can you even justify this in late August going into September, benching him for a day and sitting him down and said, listen, this is unacceptable. Like, you are an MVP caliber player, but you're playing like fucking Jose Lopez. You know what I mean? Like, can you justify benching these two?
I think you can do it now. Like, can you do it later in the season? Obviously not. But the time keeps ticking away, and I think with Houston having a much more difficult schedule than the Mariners, and the Mariners have a more light schedule, I think this is the time to do it at least for a game on Randy Arozarena and Julio Rodriguez, and basically tell them, hey, listen, we need you for the last parts of the season. We need you to perform. Both of them have not, Arozarena and Julio, and I'm actually willing to do it. Now, it would have been so much easier that if it was like July when they had the division lead somewhat and they blew it, that would have been the perfect time to do it. Or hell, would have been perfect when they had a 10-game lead. Like, we can say so many things in the past, but what, like Dan Wilson said, or did anyone else say, I don't even think he said it, but we can all agree that there's nothing we can do about the past, but there's something that there is time to do those kind of moves, like letting Julio sit and let whoever else get more opportunities and bats. And it's not like it doesn't even matter anymore at this time right now, because they were both useless. Arozarena was useless. Julio's useless. Arozarena, in my opinion, shouldn't even be a cleanup hitter, because look at his runners and scoring position numbers. They are atrocious. And yes, he got the home run on Monday, and people may be saying he's back. But honestly, after I looked at the home run, it was a really lucky hit. It was insanely lucky. And honestly, the offense in that entire game got insanely lucky. Now, am I going to say no to it? Of course not. But if that's going to be the case where they're not going to perform, then some kind of action, difficult decisions need to be done. And that's one of the advices I'm giving to Dan Wilson is don't be afraid to bench even your best player for a game, just to give them perspective that you're not performing.
To prove a point. Yeah, just to
prove a point. And Dan Wilson can say, hey, back in my old days when Lou Piniella said that if you're batting below 240, you're going to Tacoma. Be thankful that that's not the case. Right. That may not be the case, but if you continue this, then things are, at least you're sitting a game.
Right. And, I wonder if Dan Wilson has the balls to be able to do that, right? Because, you wonder whether or not this is coming straight from the top with Jerry Dipoto, whether they have to be in the lineup every day. Does Dan Wilson have the autonomy to make those decisions? And they're tough decisions. I mean, right now the Mariners are in a position where they're right there at the top of the division. I mean, it's still within their grasp. But that being said, now you can understand why I wanted a guy like Juan Soto or Pete Alonso in the lineup, somebody that takes the pressure off of Julio Rodriguez to be that guy. it's apparent to me right now because, Julio's still young, right? Julio is not even 25 years old. And there's he's not even in his prime yet. There's still a lot of time for Julio to figure it out. But right now, Julio Rodriguez doesn't have the capability of putting this team on his shoulders. Last year, I know in the summer, it looked like he was capable of it when he got hot in August. But, for the largest part of his career, Julio has not been able to come through when you needed him to. There was Sid Rocks here is just asking. I'm wondering if Julio's ankle is affecting him potentially. But that being said, if there was a like he's dressed and he's in the lineup, so he's going to play. You know what I mean? Like if it was to a point where it was bothering him, the Mariners being very overcautious with everybody, they would sit him out if there was still an issue. Reflect the Sun asks, how does one improve pitch recognition? Attack fastballs early in the count. Don't take them for strikes. You know what I mean? Even if it's the first pitch of the at-bat, be aggressive. And if you fly out or if you ground out, so be it. Get used to hitting the fastball. The best way to recognize it is putting bat to ball early in counts. And don't put yourself in a position where you're going to be put in a hole because, as you know, this Mariners team is the worst hitting two-strike team that I've ever seen in my life, right? This team does not know how to hit with two strikes. So the best remedy to it is first pitch fastball. If you see it and if it's down the plate, take advantage of pitchers that are trying to get ahead. That's the best way to do it.
Well, I'm pretty sure we're pretty much in the Dan Wilson advice anyway, and it's true. Like, so be it. And I remember I said it on record that maybe don't chase immediately. And now at this point, they have to play aggressive because there's really not much time left. And as for Dan Wilson, like, I think it's clear that my opinion on this is about if he has the authority to do anything. The thing is, he came in, he did arrive into a situation where it's pretty much nothing to lose. Like, I think there's a part of me that he was possibly very reluctant to take the job because he did not want to leave his family. And the only reason why he was able to, because his kids are all grown up anyway.
Right.
And they don't have the interim tag on him. So really, Dan Wilson has as much freedom to do whatever he wants because he would like to think, unless Dan Wilson really believes that Julio can turn it around without discipline. But I think the discipline is needed. And I would be comfortable doing it on this game, even though it's a Luis Castillo day, or maybe you do it on one of those Angels games, but maybe you do it in Seattle in front of those fans just to prove a point. Like, do it in front of your fans. So right. Because if you do it on the road, it's like if you do it on the road, it's like whatever, no one cares. I mean, if anything, if you give them the night off, that's like an easy way to basically be tempted to go to Disneyland. But you do it in front of your fans, you're embarrassed that you're not even playing.
Right. I think, yeah, no, you bring up a very good point, right? Because, doing it on the road, it probably gets lost in some, weak Mariner narrative. But, to hold a guy like Julio Rodriguez accountable in front of your own fans, right? But also, there's more to that. But also making a statement to the media, your home media, by saying, yeah, that's right, we're benching him for a game because these results are not what is expected of a Seattle Mariner, especially a guy with that type of contract, a face of the franchise. These results are just not meeting up to the expectations that we have for him. So we're benching him. Like, to say that to your home media and sending that message to the fans, that right there would probably endear every Mariner fan to Dan Wilson, because not only is it saying that you have the autonomy to do something like that, but you're not afraid to do it in a playoff chase. You know what I mean? Like, that takes some serious stones. 100% that takes some serious stones. And I'm 100% with you. I actually think it's 100% needed. I wouldn't, like, even though that we need the win today to take the series, I also would love it to see him show no fear by doing that today.
And the thing is, and it's not like the Mariners are going to lose much out of benching Julio and Arozarena, because what the heck have they done in the past week anyway? They're all just striking outs, and they're striking out when it matters. So I think it should be done, and I don't think they're going to lose much. Like, are you going to get a home run from Julio today? The way he's playing, very unlikely because the power just seems to be gone.
Or, William Cook here says 7th in the order. How about 9th in the order? How about bat him last?
Give him the opportunity to provide value at the bottom. That's an opportunity, so the pressure won't be on as much. And do the same thing to Rosarena. Even though I was opposed to the idea of putting Julio at 6 just based on numbers, but that was just me giving Scott a bunch of crap. So maybe, I guess my hate towards Scott was in some ways personal, but it happened because of the Robbie Ray. So it did personally hurt. But do you have any other advice for Dan the man? Like, because we all love him, we always will, but we're always going to be saying like, hey, you should do this, or hey, you should do this. He's not going to be free from criticism just because he's Dan Wilson. We're still going to hold him accountable as a fan.
I like that he went back to Colin Snyder. I like seeing that. Towards the end there for Scott Service, he kind of did the same thing with Jimmy Garcia, and I like the fact that he went back to him the day after he coughed up a 2-run home run to Detroit. And I'd like to see that with Colin Snyder. Just let him know that you have his back, and that, these type of things, it doesn't affect me, so it shouldn't affect you. Reflect the Sun actually stole the words right out of my mouth. He said, I love that Dan is putting the game in motion more than we have before. And, I've been on your show a lot this season, and I've been consistent. Like, what do I want to see from this team is putting this game in motion. Don't be afraid to steal bases. Make the defense be the one to make those mistakes and force teams to play your game. And I like that so far in the 1 week that we've had Dan Wilson, it looks like he is trying to dictate the games. And to me, I think that, that shows a leader. So, I mean, if there's any advice, double down on that, play small ball. And, if that means, last night, Victor Robles swiping bases. One
thing happened.
Good things happen when you do that, but also don't be afraid to drop down a bunt, like mix in a squeeze. You know what I mean? You never see it. You never see it anymore. Do things that will catch the defense off guard, especially when you have guys in your lineup like Robles, like Luke Raley that can drop a bunt. Just always be 10 steps ahead of your defense. Like, look at this as a chess game, right? So always always have your next move in your back pocket before your opponent has it. And do, like, literally just do the little things that you can to at least squeak out a run in an inning. That's really what it comes down to. I will say that, eventually that clutch hit or that sacrifice fly will come. If you're just being aggressive. I think you mentioned good things will happen. 100% they will, man. The things that have, like, the way that the Mariners have played under Scott Service, you never got that clutch base hit ever. The Mariners would be in a situation where they have runners on first and second, nobody out, or they would be with one out, runners on second and third, and they could never cash in. You know what I mean? Like, there were times where, we've seen Luke Raley drop a bunt out of nowhere. And he ended up on first base safe because the defense was just not expecting a bunt in that situation. And I would love to see that, that squeeze. You know what I mean? Figure out a way to manufacture runs when for whatever reason that clutch base hit is not there.
One of the other things I liked, and a good example of stealing and being aggressive, was, although Dylan Moore got thrown out at second, I still thought it was the right decision for Dylan Moore or Dan Wilson to authorize it, because it was playing aggressive. It just happened to be thrown out. And unfortunately, it was to a longtime Mariner prospect, Alex Jackson, who actually was on the Mariners organization as a first-round pick. And then he was bounced around the league and unfortunately just happened to be him. But just because it's the right decision doesn't mean it's going to work. Just like the decision of JT Chargois and Colin Snyder. Any other game, that's a fantastic decision. And I still think they were not bad decisions. Now, of course, you're going to get the extremes are going to say, well, Logan Gilbert should have went into 100. But the thing was, I was okay with pulling Logan Gilbert, not because of the pitch count. It was actually because he was getting diced up when it was getting later into the game. So it was still the correct decision. And yes, if Scott Service did it, I wouldn't have faulted him for it. I would have faulted him for a bad lineup construction, just like the lineup construction that Dan Wilson's doing. Now, it's slightly different. It's not exactly as matchup obsessed, but it still needs it could still use adjustments.
Well, what I would do is after that 6th inning, when Logan Gilbert comes into the dugout and you ask him how he's feeling, are you gassed? What was the nature for leaving your fastball up? I mean, was it just a missed pitch? What are you tired? Do you have the ability to go out there again in the 7th? That's the thing. Competitors are going to want the ball. This isn't like George Kirby last year in Tampa Bay when he was like, I was done, and I told that to Scott, and Scott put me back out there for the 7th, right? I understood 100% what George Kirby was talking about, right? If you go to a pitcher and you ask him, hey, how are you feeling? And if he tells you that I'm tired, you go to the bullpen. But that being said, though, I would like to think that the competitor in Logan Gilbert wanted to go back out there. I don't fault him for going to the bullpen either. But that being said, right, JT Chargois is the guy in the bullpen who's first out. But that being said, though, 7, 8, 9, also you could have brought in Colin Snyder 7, and then mixed and match 8, 9. That if I'm going to nitpick something, JT Chargois comes in the middle of the 5th in the 6th inning, first out of the bullpen. But this is the 7th inning now, right? So now this is late relief. This is high leverage inning, trying to protect a one run lead, and JT Chargois necessarily isn't that. So if there's any nitpicky things that I'm going to say about Dan, it's I understood, man. Chargois is the first out of the bullpen, but this isn't the 6th. These are high leverage inning now, and you have to turn to your best high leverage arms.
Well, yeah, those are. I mean, it's nothing wrong with nitpicking, and but the thing was, the point was, had the game not just been 1-0, and had it been like 3-0, then maybe it'd be a different outcome.
It would be a different outcome, 100%. I want to ask you this question real quick. And if this thing falls apart and the Mariners miss the playoffs, does this reflect on Dan Wilson, his inability to get him there, or is this straight on Jerry Dipoto?
I don't think, no matter how bad the season's gone for the rest of the season, I don't know, which that was the next topic we were going to talk about anyway.
Oh, well,
I don't think it's really hard to put it on Dan Wilson because as of now, yes, granted, it's been only 5 games, but hey, there's probably interim managers or new managers that made it worse and they went 0-5.
Right.
But I don't think this could be a reflection on Dan Wilson because we've already seen how he's doing it. Like, he's already making better decisions.
Absolutely.
He's already telling his team to play more aggressively. Like, you can see a huge difference. And I think I know I said this yesterday, but in one of those games against the Giants, the Mariners actually walked more batters than they actually did against the Dodgers in 3 games combined. So there is progress. And yes, granted, they're against the Giants and the Tampa Bay Rays when they won that first game. But don't forget, Mariners also abused this easy schedule as well in that entire time in July and August. So if it fails, I don't think anyone's going to put in Dan Wilson. I won't. But if it goes to a point where it's so bad, like if the team completely implodes, then yeah, maybe you should be open to getting like the Joe Maddens or the Terry Francona. At least give Dan Wilson some kind of competition. At least have some at least go through interview processes. But ultimately, if it does fail, then yeah, you got to put some of it. No, you got to put all of it on Jerry Dipoto. It's gonna be more reflection on him because of how he did this lineup. And the crazy thing is, all Jerry really had to do, and this is not what we would have wanted back then, but just to stay pat, stay the course, before they traded Paul Sewald. Had the team been the exact same team, possibly Houston is not even in the conversation of winning the division.
Possibly.
Mariners probably have at least, I'd like to say, at least a 3-game lead on the division, if not more. And that's with Matt Brash and Santos hurt. They still would have probably figured out, because you still get big hits out of Eugenio Suarez. Now, the Teoscar Hernandez thing is a little bit of a push, because we don't know if he would have taken the $20 million. We just don't know. Correct. So I think I still assume that he's gone. But hey, Mariners get a first-round pick, and Jared gets a prospect that he can worship over, basically.
Right.
And even without Teoscar, you probably would have still gotten Luke Raley, so that would have been a formidable replacement. Not the replacement, but something. And then you still have Eugenio Suarez and Jared Kelenic. Maybe, like, even with that, they're still in this division lead, and that's all on Jerry. And maybe I shouldn't have fallen for that whole ownership thing, because I remember when it did happen, I was like, oh, it must be John Stanton. But I'm starting to think it's more on Jerry DiPoto, because he wasn't able to recover after that either.
Yeah, I never believed the payroll limitations that were set forth because of the whole RoofTopSports thing. I thought it was bullshit when I read it, and because we know that Jerry DiPoto, he's publicly came out and said that he does not believe in giving out long-term contracts to free agent bats. It's just not. He prefers the roster flexibility, and he likes the guys that play multiple positions, those type of things as well too. But also, that's the thing. It's like when you lock yourself into a player that specifically only plays one position, then there's not a lot of room. There's not a lot of room to maneuver, especially in the outfield. You like guys that can play multiple positions, and you can get other guys in the lineup, that type of thing. But like if this thing implodes and it doesn't finish well, and the Mariners like lose 10 out of their last 13 to end the season, or whatever the case may be, there's no way you can blame Dan Wilson. There is absolutely no way you can blame Dan Wilson, because he was just brought in to try to get the best of whatever the situation was. And this falls squarely on the shoulders of Jerry DiPoto, because let's remember, this was him and Justin Hollander were pimping out this lineup at the beginning of the season, telling everybody how this was the best lineup in the best lineup in their Mariner tenure. Never mind the fact that the 2016, 17, and 18 lineups, that featured Nelson Cruz and Robbie Cano and Kyle Seager, a young Mitch Haniger, were night and day better than this. Not only did they have the power, but they had far better contact than this squad. And we were told that this lineup was going to be far and away night and better than the lack of contact from the year before. And it was all good vibes. And of course, this ended up being, they were going to limit the strikeouts. And not only has this been one of the worst teams as far as strikeouts goes, but statistically, it's probably one of the worst offenses we've seen in the last 50 years. And that falls squarely on the guy who was trying to pimp this lineup at the beginning of the season, which is Jerry DiPoto. And at that point, Jerry DiPoto loses all credibility, because when you look at the moves that he's made coming into this offseason, getting rid of Jared Kelenic and Teoscar Hernandez and Eugenio Suarez, and you replace them with a shot Mitch Garver, a shot Mitch Haniger, and bringing in Jorge Polanco, who had been in the league 12 years already. He's 31, and you would think that he's at the tail end of his prime. But that being said, there's already a lot of miles on him, plus the injury issue. And then at the deadline goes out and gets another Julio Rodriguez type bat, which is high slugging, high power, but also a high strikeout bat in Randy Arozarena. Like if this team had a good collection, like I'll give you a name, like if it had like the Luis Arias type bats, where it was very contact oriented, high contact, high OBP type of bats in this lineup, you can bring in a Randy Arozarena, you can bring in that power type bat, because there's going to be ample lineup protection in order for him to be able to do his thing. But he also, you bring a Randy Arozarena into this lineup that already has the strikeout issue, and it magnifies that problem 10 times. Like I actually thought the Arozarena trade was actually going to be good for the Mariners, But that being said, though, you also had to look at what if the strikeout issue continues to happen? How effective is he going to be? Because all pitchers are going to do is just pitch right around him, which they have. So for me, and we'll know within the first 2 weeks of September if this thing is trending downwards. If I'm John Stanton, dude, I'm pulling the plug on Jerry Dipoto, because at that point in time, Jerry Dipoto can't sell a narrative to the fan base because the fan bases are not going to trust him. And then also what happens if the fans stop showing up if Jerry Dipoto is allowed to continue? That affects John Stanton's bottom line, and Daddy does not like it when the money's not rolling in. And so at that point, you're almost forced to make that move. But I would also do it as well, too, because you give enough time before the end of the season, from September to the end of the season, to get a guy in place ready for the offseason. We've mentioned the name Theo Epstein. I would back up a Brinks truck to Theo Epstein's door and just say, hey, listen, man, you're the curse breaker. Break it. Right? Bring in a proven winner who is going to reshape this front office, who is going to look at this lineup and say, yes, you're staying. No, you're gone. And we have a flush minor league system where we can make trades to bring in the right type of hitters to this team. And let's get this, let's actually get this lineup rolling and get this pitching staff into a World Series, because right now the window is, we only have 3 more years left on this window. And I got to be honest with you, man, I don't think you can trust Jerry Dipoto to do it.
Not at all. And the red flags I should have saw, and maybe the first red flag was, it should have been, like, I gave Jerry a lot of leeway. I was younger back then. I let him have the Jack Sorensic excuse. I really did. And I'll eat my words for that. But I think most of us would have anyway. We gave him the free pass when he blew up the team. I think most Mariner fans were actually proponents of blowing up that team of Robinson, Cano, Nelson, Cruz, because I think they were already peaking. Sure. We were okay with that. We were like, okay, fine. We will accept. Really, it was just 2 bad years of baseball. Actually, the rebuild happened pretty rapid, much quicker than we expected. And he did take us to the playoffs. He did get Luis Castillo. And yes, he got lucky with that trade. He got insanely lucky. But the trades that really got to me were the Kendall Graveman trade. I have no way of defending that. And I know Mariner fans that really defended that because they're like, oh, but we got a bat in Abraham Toro, but we just nuked our bullpen. And then 2 years later, he does the same thing, trading away Paul Sewald. And my God, we could use Paul Sewald right now. Yes, he's not doing 100%. Well, but with the Mariners, and hey, the Marine layer, he'd be quite a bit more useful than what we've got right now of Paul Sewald, and he would have been the closer. Andres Munoz is the shutdown setup guy, because he is still, in my opinion, too erratic to be a closer, but he's a great setup, great 7th guy. And how has that trade gone down? Like, the only players that have really worked out is April Josh Rojas and Ryan Bliss. That's it. And sadly, Ryan Bliss is a spark plug, probably a utility player at best. Right. I mean, not utility, more of like a bench player, like a Dylan Moore. Sure. But Canzone is the reason why this trade has completely failed, because Canzone was supposed to be that natural hitter, that Jared Kelenic replacement at the start of the season. And yes, when he hits a home run, it's a beautiful home run. But when he strikes out, he looks like he's half-assed swinging it. So I think those two trades alone should be part of the reason why he should be fired. And let's not mention the 54% doing the fans a favor and his atrocious 2024, going into the 2024 season of off-season.
Well, just the idea this offseason, putting yourself in a position of weakness, right? Jared Kelenic, and I understand, he had 132 strikeouts last year, but he still hit 253 with a 327 OBP. He was slugging 419 and had a 746 OPS. I would even with a I guess you can call him a streaky player like Jared Kelenic, he gave you stability in the outfield. And look at what's happened this year, especially in the first half of the season, where what's funny is I love Mariner fans that want to sit there and give me the advanced metrics on it, on the hard hit rate of Dominic Canzone. We saw it last year. in the small sample size that he was not equipped to play Major League Baseball, or at least be an everyday player in Major League Baseball. And imagine having the stability of a Jared Kelenic in playing left field, right? This year it was Dom Canzone, who literally cannot play every day, and you have a washed Mitch Haniger playing right field, basically two defensive liabilities in the outfield. At least with the Jared Kelenic, you had some stability in left field where you can actually now mix and match in right field. You're giving Mitch Haniger some actual, being in a position where he doesn't have to play every day. But most often it's stability. And if you're going to get rid of a Eugenio Suarez, that has to be replaced with somebody that's better, or at least somebody who is on the same path. Everybody was talking about Matt Chapman this afternoon, and not this afternoon, but this entire offseason. And it made sense because you actually have a good glove at third base and somebody who at least offensively is going to, give you somewhere on the same wavelength of what Eugenio Suarez was going to give you. And yet they decided to platoon the third base position with Luis Arias, who was DFA'd early, and, Josh Rojas, who again is not an everyday player. Like, these were the decisions. These were the decisions that were made by Jerry Dipoto, that he was going to nickel and dime his defensive alignment. And, and you can understand, you're looking back on it, you can understand why this team struggled, because you're relying on guys who can't play every single day and guys who, I hate to use this term, but they're washed. And it's amazing that the Mariners were able to build a 10-game lead in the division to begin with anyways. But
with that kind of team, it was an absolute freaking miracle.
But you also,
and with a tougher schedule too.
And you knew that Houston was eventually going to get healthy and mount a charge, right? So it's like, this was bound to happen. But that being said, that is also a direct reflect of the guy that put this team together. This team had flaws, and you were just hoping that they were going to tread water to the second half. Like, that was coming into the season. That's what I said. I just said, listen, there's not really one guy on this team that's going to be able to carry it. It was going to be a collective. And the hope was that they were going to tread water to the second half because, this collective is a second half team. They've shown it over the course of the last 3 years. And then if Jerry goes out there at the deadline to add to it, maybe this team can catch fire in the second half. And at that point, who knows how it's going to play. But unfortunately, this team peaked early. And then the second half hasn't turned, like, maybe it will. But, then it had one of the worst Junes and Julys that this franchise has ever seen. And now we're where we are. And there's no coach that's going to be able to undo what Jerry Dipoto has done. And the worst part is there was no depth at AAA. You know what I mean? You're not going to, like, if you sub Don Canzone for Cade Marlowe, is that better?
Not much at all. I mean, you'll get a more of a hustler than Don Canzone, but it's not saying much.
But what they could do is bring up Cole Young. They could bring up Ty Locklear. You know what I mean? And I got to be honest with you, that's better than what you can put at first base right now. And you
Justin Turner.
You can't keep running Leo Rivas and Dylan Moore at shortstop every day. I know that JP is almost back, but that being said, they also missed an opportunity with JP out to bring up a young guy like Cole Young and give him his cup of coffee. And who knows? Maybe he'll come up in September when the rosters expand. But this is what we had to work with, and it was. I got to be honest with you. It was worse than last year. Last year, yeah, there was a lot of strikeouts, but eventually they caught fire.
They made up for it, and they got hot.
They made up for it when they got hot, but of course they didn't have the horses to finish it off in September. And you're absolutely right. And that's what should have been the priority: keeping Suarez, keeping Jared Kelenic plugged in there, Kelenic, and that being said, just get a right fielder, get a second baseman. You still could have traded for Polanco and added Polanco to that crew from last year.
He would have had much more protection.
Right. And then you can add your quintessential veteran right fielder and ran it back, and you still would have had a little bit better of an opportunity this year But when they gutted this team, they just decided to platoon 3 different positions, and they got what they deserve. I hate to say it, man. They got what they deserve.
They did, and it's tragic that it'll fall on Jerry. And the other thing that the Mariners really lost out of Suarez, and I want to touch into this really quick before we play a little bit of a game before this show ends, but what they missed out of trading away Eugenio Suarez was that leadership. Not only his defense, not only his hitting. Yes, he struck out like 200 times, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But he made up for it with leadership, defense, his bat, and his ability. And he was that big brother to Julio Rodriguez. Like a couple examples. The Angels game when Julio got thrown out at second base on controversy, which was umpire played flip-flopsies on him. And then he outburst and screamed at the crowd. Yeah.
Hey, by the way, and I know that a lot of people think that Suarez this year is his numbers are down. He's got 141 strikeouts so far, but right now he's hitting 239, which is up 7 points from where he finished last year. And his OBP is down to 309, but his slugging is up and his OPS is up too. He's slugging 433 with a 742 OPS, 20 home runs, 79 RBIs.
That could be, we could use that
right now. And it's like, listen, he's always going to be that guy who's going to be like a 235 to 250 hitter on the high side. But you have him there because he slugged, man. He could slug the baseball. And what's so interesting about this is that imagine Gino's numbers in our lineup this year.
He would be probably the best player. And going back to the Angels game from last year, when Julio had that huge outburst to the crowd and the dugout, and even like Scott Service tried to like intervene, but then Suarez was like, no, I got this. He calmed him down, and next thing you know, Julio literally caught fire. And I think that was the moment when Julio really caught fire, was when Eugenio Suarez mentally calmed him down, was that leader, and had Eugenio Suarez been there for this season, maybe a breakout could have happened. And the other example of why we miss Eugenio Suarez was when Julio had that little scuffle with Hector Neris about the whole possibilities of the whole, things that Hector Neris possibly said, although I know a Dominican Republic guy from the Dominican Republic, his Twitter, he said that it was just pure trash talk. But anyway, besides the point, Suarez, although he took it a little bit too far, in my opinion, or however you want to interpret it to the media, the bottom line was he still had Julio's back. Like, whether you agree with it or not, you still like the idea that he had his back. And I remember I criticized Eugenio Suarez at the time for playing with the media too much, but the bottom line was he did it to protect his younger brother.
What's funny is William Cook right here says, Suarez hit 315 with runners in scoring position last year. He was actually our best hitter with runners in scoring position last year. And the fact that he went to Arizona and he improved on his slugging numbers from last year, and the fact that Teoscar Hernandez went to LA and has just become all world. I think he won the home run derby this year. That also should be grounds for dismissal, right? The idea of a GM, since this team has been on the come up, 2021, only one time has this team gotten better from one year to the next. That was from 2021 to 2022. Arguably, this team got so far better, and of course that paid off. But it's progressively gotten worse from the high of 2022 to where we are now in 2024. Like, Jerry DiPoto has not been good, for the Mariners. You talk about the messaging of Scott Service, how that gotten bland, how that gotten stale, and all of a sudden Dan Wilson comes in, and in 5 games he's 3-2. That also that organizational messaging, that philosophy, also tends to get stale in the front office. And now there's word coming out that Justin Hollander rubs people the wrong way in the front office. That he's not.
He rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah, he's not a people person.
I mean, look at him. Look at him in the press conference from 22 off season. When he was asked a question and it was literally pointed at Justin, Justin just starts looking at Jerry, and Jerry's like, dude, that's the question for you.
I understand there's a risk. Bringing in a new front office, there's a risk that there might be drastic change right off the bat, because a lot of these dudes want to bring in their own type of players. But just when Jerry DiPoto came in, you remember what the mandate was from John Stanton, which was get Robbie, get Boomstick, get Kyle Seager, and get Felix Hernandez to the playoffs, right? And that core still stayed while the fringe of the lineup radically changed, right? And it would probably be the exact same thing with the new front office, where it's like, let's get this core to the playoffs. So do what you got to do with the back half of this lineup. Do what you got to do. But the core, we got to get this core in the playoffs before eventually they leave in free agency.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully we don't see the likes of Jerry DiPoto and Justin Hollander again, because time's up. Like, there is no way Stanton should be giving this guy another 1 year. I would not.
By the way, flick of the switch. It's time to put to bed this whole narrative that John Stanton doesn't want to win. He does want to win. Every team in Major League Baseball, with the exception of the Los Angeles Dodgers, operates within a budget, right? But every single year that our budget continues to rise. Believe it or not, our budget continues to rise. Jerry DiPoto had a budget. That was not a mandate because that came down from ownership this year. That there was somebody beat the brakes off the budget, right? Jerry DiPoto was the one that made the decision to get rid of Geno Suarez.
Because he was so desperate to get rid of strikeouts, and he did it in a very costly way.
Right. Well, they looked at it and said that he was on the downturn, and we can use that $11 million elsewhere.
For Mitch Garver.
Yeah, I mean, to go from Geno to Mitch Garver.
How could you justify that? Like, you just can't.
You can't.
Now, yeah. So we are now at the last parts of our show, and I think this is going to be a little bit fun. And we did go over all the Jerry DiPotos and the Dan Wilsons. So if you have any other comments, once this show ends, put it in the comments of this show and let us know how you feel about the Mariners going forward. But we're going to play a little bit of a fun game where could the Mariners make the playoffs easily? Like, I'm talking about easily with any of these kind of offenses. And we'll try to do this as quickly as we can and not try to talk about it too much. But we're going to go from 2004 all the way up to, I guess, before the purge of 2019. Okay. We'll just go from there. 2004, this team had Dan Wilson on his last full healthy season. John Olerud was fringe. Brett Boone was pretty much peaked at that point. Rich Aurelia, Scott Spezio, Raul Ibanez, Randy Wynn, Ichiro, and a retiring Edgar Martinez. Don't forget Bucky Jacobson and Justin Leone. Does this team with that offense make the playoffs?
Yes. And the reason why I say yes, because collectively, that team hit 270 with a 331 OBP. Yeah, the slugging wasn't up. It was only 396, but their OPS was 727. I think they hit 136 home runs last year and nearly 700 RBI, even though that John Olerud was at the end and Brett Boone had peaked, and it wasn't like quintessential Raul Ibanez. You still had Edgar, who was still hitting. You still had Dan Wilson at the end of his career. That team still, with today's pitching staff, that team probably gets in.
2005, when you brought in a struggling Adrian Beltre, which he did struggle coming off of that 48 home run season. Richie Sexton, a pretty much dead Brett Boone. Dan Wilson had tore his ACL. Miguel Olivo batting a $151. Yep. Dude, does that make the playoffs?
It does not. It does not, because Miguel Olivo was trash. Brett Boone had sagged to the point where he got DFA'd. Unieski Betancourt was mid at best. The only guys you had in that lineup that were worth a damn was Adrian Beltre and Ichiro Suzuki. They didn't have a center fielder. Actually, let me rephrase that. Raul Ibanez had a really good year that year too. So at least you have Beltre and Ibanez. Richie Sexton, yeah, he had a pretty solid year that year. Actually, he had a very solid year that year. 39 home runs. Yeah, his quads. He had an OPS. He had an OPS of 910 with an OPS plus of 144. So yeah, the problem with that, there was not a lot of lineup balance. So I think at times they struggle. But could that line up with today's pitching staff be an 85 win team, an 85 to 88 win team? 100%.
2006. Kenji Jojima, Richie Sexton, Jose Lopez All-Star season. Yunieski Betancourt broke out. Beltre started to adjust. Jeremy Reed was still your center fielder, and Carl Everett was your DH. Does that team make the playoffs of 06? I think it does, because they were better than 2005.
Right, because Kenji Jojima gave you an OPS plus of 103. Richie Sexton was still productive. Didn't slug like he did the year before, but he had an 842 OPS. And then you have Jose Lopez, All-Star year. Betancourt was pretty solid. Ibanez had an OPS plus of 125. Adrian Beltre
33 home runs.
Adrian Beltre was a lot better in 2006. And then Ichiro Suzuki is Ichiro. The only problem is Carl Everett and Jeremy Reed, but you would probably think that they would upgrade those at the deadline. So 100% it makes the playoffs.
2007, we pretty much agreed that they did, but just for fun, and we'll skip over the 2008 because I think we kind of touched on it anyway. Still had Jojima. Sexton was kind of on his downturn. Lopez had a down year.
Yep.
But regardless, and Jose Vidro as your DH was actually pretty good. 314 with a 381 OBP. Yeah. Jose Guillen,
was decent.
Easy. That team makes the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, you look at their OPS plus. You had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those finished with over 100 OPS plus. And you look at the collective slugging and OPS of that team. It was absolutely fantastic. Kenji almost hit 15 that year. Richie still hit 20. Lopez had a down year, but it still wasn't terrible. And then Adrian Beltre, 26 home runs, 99 RBIs. Raul Ibanez drove in 105. You also had Jose Guillen, who damn near had 100 RBI that season, 150%. That team makes the playoffs.
2008. Oh, this is going to be fun. You have Kenji Jojima pretty much declined. Richie Sexton, dead. Lopez was decent. Betancourt was error. Beltre was still around. Ibanez was your best player. Jeremy Reed's still around. Jose Vidro sucks. Does that team... You still take a 2008 team to the playoffs.
No, but this was the year that I believe... wasn't this
Carlos
the year
Silva.
This was like 2008. This was the year that Homedew got fired. I think they lost 100 games with $100 million payroll.
They did.
Yep. And this, I think, Brad Wilkerson.
He started that season. Yeah.
Yeah. He was starting in right field. This was the year that we were introduced to Vladimir Valentin. I think Jeff Clement.
And Willie Bloom. Came in.
Yep. And this, we even got to see Tug Hewlett that year. So, and Matt Tuiasosopo and Luis Valbuena. Mike Morse was a part of Got a Cup of Coffee, Carlton Jimerson. This was the year that everything just fell apart. And even with this pitching staff, you probably see a lot of what we're seeing today.
So you think it's about the same, like it's a push?
It's it's a push.
So basically you can't really tell at this point.
I would say
crazy. Brad Wilkerson had a 232 average, a 348, and back then we were saying that was garbage. And frankly, we could still use those numbers. We could still use a broken bat Brad Wilkerson on this offense.
Right. I just think that team fell apart and couldn't figure out a way to undo the damage. I I think you would see what we're seeing today, a team that just literally could not hit with runners in scoring position. You had a team that struck out in impromptu times. I just think that 2008, I think we'd kind of be in the same boat. I actually think that maybe they finish with a below 500 record. So I'm still going to say no.
Okay, we'll say no, even though maybe it would have been a push. It could have gone either way. But 2009, this team won 85 games with a dead Ken Griffey Jr.
Yeah,
and I think we can say it would have made the playoffs. But here's the lineup: Rob Johnson, Russell the Muscle Branyan came out of nowhere, Jose Lopez prime, Betancourt was still dangling around, Beltre broke his balls because he doesn't wear a cup, Vladimir Valentin stuck the hole. Gutierrez, you might as well say that was his prime. Ichiro was still hanging, and at least Griffey couldn't have been worse than Mitch Haniger or Mitch Garver.
Here's what was awesome about this team, because they got out of nowhere performers from Mike Sweeney, who had 242 at bats this year and had a very good year. They got production out of Endy Chavez. They even got production out of, believe it or not, Josh Wilson.
And Jack Wilson. It was Jack Wilson. Actually, it was both Joshes. They actually did something. Yeah, Jack wasn't, Jack was, but, Michael Saunders, you got some production out of Ryan Langerhans. This was a weird year, because when you look at it, you're like, how does this team win 85 games? But that was a cool year where they believed in the group and they believed in the collective, even though that they didn't have a good catcher. Jose Lopez, I still call him Josie, ended up with an OPS plus of over 100. He actually had 25 home runs that year. But Betancourt was mid. Adrian Beltre, I think he only played in 111 games that year. And I thought he was still pretty decent, even though his power numbers didn't reflect it. I still thought he was pretty good. That they were doing it without a left fielder. This was like the last year of Ken Griffey Jr. And I just think that because of the collective, like, this team literally believed in itself. And I think at the front of it was Ken Griffey Jr. and Ichiro Suzuki. And that manifested at the end of the season, where both of them were carried off on their shoulders on an 85 win team. I'm going to say yes, because that was like the one time I can remember where this team played as a collective and understood their faults and still were still able to produce. I believe that was the team that also had the Trojan masks in the bullpen with David Ardsma and Mark Lowe. That actually ended up coming together with a really cool, that ended up being a really good bullpen. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. That team. I would have said yes without even hesitation, because they won 85 games with that kind of offense. Yeah, they would have made it. They just didn't have the most elite pitching staff, but it's what it is. That's correct. 2010. Now, this is statistically the worst offense in Mariners history, and people still say it's the worst offense in modern time. But here's your lineup. It was. Adam Moore was your catcher aside from Rod Johnson. Casey Kochman was your first baseman. Sean Figgins at least had a 260-ish batting average. Josh Wilson was your starting shortstop. Jose Lopez was pretty much dead at that point. Michael Saunders was like on the rise. Franklin Gutierrez was meh. Ichiro was last All-Star season. And Russell Branyan came into the rescue for basically pointless reasons. And Milton Bradley and a dead Ken Griffey Jr. Yeah, so this was weird, because this was the year that the Mariners were talking World Series. They had traded for Cliff Lee, and the idea of Felix Hernandez and Cliff Lee at the top of the rotation. They had a pretty solid Jason Vargas and Doug Fister. And they had a very good Doug Fister, right? So they had a very good rotation. I thought their bullpen was pretty good that year too. But this is the weird thing. On paper, this was supposed to be the Moneyball version of what Jack Saranchik was trying to do. He was trying to go for more OBP. He was trying to go for more contact, play small ball. And on paper, this was an offense that should have performed a lot better. The only problem was that
They got zero production from the catcher position. Casey Kochman was washed. Sean Figgins was washed. Josh Wilson was Josh Wilson. Jose Lopez was washed. Michael Saunders was never was. And really the only three guys in their lineup that actually had a pulse was Franklin Gutierrez, Ichiro Suzuki, and Muscle Mannion. They got nothing out of Milton Bradley, and they got nothing from Tuyasa Sopo, Ryan Langerhans. They traded for Justin Smoke, who gave you nothing. Mike Sweeney gave you something in what it was in 30 games. But of course, Ken Griffey Jr. was spotted in Montana on his way out of town.
Bueller said, "Where the bleep are you?" And chances are Griffey doesn't answer that text message.
And unfortunately, it cost Don Wakamatsu his job. So, no.
Pretty tragic ending for Don Wakamatsu. I think it wasn't 100% his fault. It was just...
No, it wasn't his fault that Jack Sorensic never should have been a GM to begin with.
Yeah, that was 2010. 2011, this was the year I remember. I was actually very hopeful after this season, but here was the offense. You had Miguel Olivo, who was actually okay. Justin Smoke had a good first half-ish until the injury.
Good-ish. Yep.
You had a rising Dustin Ackley, which unfortunately that was his prime. His rookie year was basically his prime. Brendan Ryan, who was unstoppable on the defensive end.
He actually had a pretty good for his offense. He had an okay year.
He actually was okay. I'm looking at the numbers, and those are still numbers the Mariners could use. Sean Figgins, dead. Carlos Peguero, Franklin Gutierrez, injured, dead. And Ichiro, who had just lost a step, his batting average went all the way down to 272, tragically. Jack Cuss at the start, but then you also had hopefuls you had a rookie in Kyle Seager. Mike Harp had an explosive second half that came out of nowhere, and I thought he was going to be the player of the future. Casper Wells, another guy who I also liked back then, and Greg Hallman, who was also a very promising prospect, but then he died.
Oh, dude, I forgot they had Willie Mo Pena that year.
Willie Mo Pena and Milton Bradley screaming at an umpire.
There's no way this team makes the playoffs with this lineup. And what's funny is this was Dustin Ackley's best year. He finished with an OPS plus of a $120. And when you look at his quad slash, it was actually pretty solid. But that would be the best and last year of Dustin Ackley. Justin Smoke had a terrible year overall, but he still finished with an OPS plus of 106. But outside of those two players, the only guy that came close was Jack Cuss. But that should also tell you how bad this lineup was. That
Jack Cuss had a 344 OBP.
That your third best hitter with 3 home runs and 23 RBIs was Jack Cuss. The only saving grace was Kyle Seager, who actually finished with a very solid quad slash for a rookie year. Who would later go on to be one of the greatest ones ever for this Mariners team. But not only does this not make the playoffs, it doesn't even come close.
Oh, so you think this team would be worse than today's offense?
100%. 100%.
The most random stat I ever saw was Adam Kennedy with 23 doubles. That is probably the most random thing I had ever seen.
Because if you remember Adam Kennedy, he was an angel. That dude looked lost every time he stepped into the plate.
And he somehow found a way to get 23 doubles in 100 games, which is pretty impressive. Now, 2012, you had Miguel Olivo pretty much on his way out. He was struggling.
Yep.
Justin Smoke almost hit 20 home runs. Dustin Ackley, Brendan Ryan, bat was gone. Kyle Seager kind of broke out.
Yep.
Casper Wells didn't even last half a season.
Well, Kyle Seager did break out. 20 home runs, 86 RBIs.
259.
OPS plus of 108. He definitely broke out.
Michael Saunders actually had a breakout.
He broke out. Yeah, he broke out.
Ichiro was pretty much a fossil at that point, although it gave you 15 stolen bases in 95 games.
Ichiro would be later traded in the year at the deadline.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's how we ended up with Jesus Montero.
Well, Jesus Montero was off of Michael Pineda.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
All right, there's your team. And also a dead Mike Harp. John Jaso was your backup catcher.
Yeah, this is the interesting one, because even though Miguel Olivo was washed, he still chipped in 12 home runs, 29 RBIs, and his backup catcher, John Jaso, gave us 10 and 50 with a 394 OBP and an OPS plus of 142.
He walked more than he struck out.
Franklin Gutierrez in a backup role gave you an OPS plus of 105, slugged 420 with a 729 OPS that year.
Eric Thames came into the rescue.
Yeah, we had Eric Thames that year, who did manage to finish with a 93 OPS plus, had some clutch that year. This is the weird thing, right? Because Ichiro Suzuki leaves, and we didn't necessarily replace him. Our bench was not good at all. And yet, this is the weird thing. I'm going to say that this team is capable of getting to 500. With this pitching staff, it's capable. But again, your best hitters that year were Kyle Seager and Michael Saunders.
So that's going to be a no.
It's going to be a no, but it's capable of potentially finishing at 500.
2013. Oh, this was a bad season. Oh my God. Year. This was bad. I had a lot of rage fest on Facebook with this team, but your catcher was Mike Zunino at the end of the season, when it really was Jesus Montero, who was also really, really bad. And Justin Smoke finally.
This was a Mike Zunino who was rushed to the big leagues because they needed production.
Mike Zunino was, Justin Smoke finally hit 20 home runs. Nick Franklin came up, and Brad Miller. Don't forget Brad Miller.
Yep. Nick Franklin had a very bad quad slash, but still managed to go 1245 that year.
Kyle Seager was doing his usual thing. Raul Ibanez hit 29 home runs out of nowhere. Screw the Marine layer on that one.
Right.
Michael Saunders.
Still pretty solid.
Mike Morris had power. Mike Morris would basically be our typical DH this year.
Yep.
Kendrys Morales was really good.
Yep, Kendrys Morales. And then I think we saw Dustin Ackley get benched that year. Brad Miller was that nice little spark plug off the bench.
Goody was a 10 home run guy in just 41 games.
We welcomed back Andy Chavez, who was solid-ish off the bench. That was the year that we got Jason Bay, who was at the end of his career and
still performed.
Ish. He had 11 home runs, but his quad slash was absolutely terrible. Kelly Shopik. Jesus Montero had a terrible year. Henry Blanco, Abraham Almonte, who was actually pretty solid. In the 25 games he played, he was pretty solid. I'll give Almonte that. But that was pretty much the end of Alex Liddy. Carlos Peguero.
I had hope for audit. I liked Alex Liddy as a prospect.
Carlos Truenfell. Here's the thing. There were guys in this lineup, like it's to have OPS plus out of 5 guys over 100. Justin Smoke, who even though he hit 238, it still had pretty solid slugging numbers. He really did. He had pretty solid slugging numbers. Nick Franklin came close. I thought Nick had some decent at-bats that year, but it was Kyle Seager, Raul Ibanez, and Kendrys Morales that really carried this team. And quite frankly, it's not enough. So no.
I didn't think it was enough because they, on top of that, they had zero defense in the outfield. Like
Correct.
You had Ibanez, Saunders, and Mike Morris. That's basically an entire set of first basemen playing outfield. No thanks.
No thanks.
2014. I mean, they missed the playoffs by 1 game. I'm pretty sure they would have made the playoffs with this team. But let's just do this. Mike Zunino, basically the same thing as Cal Raleigh. Logan Morrison, Robbie Cano, who didn't even have to hit home runs to be effective.
Right.
Brad Miller, Kyle Seager was entering his prime. Dustin Ackley actually, he hit 14 home runs. Went to the outfield
and actually had a pretty solid year.
James Jones, which he had 27 stolen bases.
Yep. Jimmy Jones, who actually was solid-ish. Didn't get on base enough, but you're right. He had 27 steals.
Michael Saunders,
Good year.
He was pretty much
very good
dead
year.
at that point. Corey Hart.
Yeah.
Justin Smoke injured. Still Kendrick's coming back. Austin Jackson. I think it's obvious that this team makes the playoffs with this starting rotation and the bullpen.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, what's funny is you would think that in this situation that at the trading deadline, they would improve center field and they would figure out a way to rotate DH between Corey Hart, Kendrys Morales, and Justin Smoke. But what's funny, even though that Mike Zunino hit a .199, finished the season under the Mendoza line, he still slugged .404 with a .658 OPS, 22 home runs, 60 RBIs. This was actually Logan Morrison's best year as a Mariner. Robbie Cano is Robbie Cano. He was still in his prime. They would need to upgrade the shortstop position, but Dustin Ackley, Corey Seager had pretty good years, and Michael Saunders. This was probably like the last of the best years of Michael Saunders. I know where they finished, but unless they actually added just a few extra couple tweaks to that lineup, yeah, I can see them making the playoffs with the expanded wild cards 100%.
2015, and also fun fact, I actually met Corey Hart at a retail store. I was his cashier, and I actually asked him, like, hey, so what are your plans for next year? And this is what he said: I want to go back to the National League. He literally said that's like, I'm going back to the National League.
That's funny.
He was a cool guy. And now 2015, I think at this point, any of these, I think I'm just going to cut straight to the chase. I think any of these the last year of Mike Zunino and the first half of Jerry DiPoto's offense, I think they all make the playoffs. I mean, I don't think we have to waste too much time on that.
Well,
2015.
This is what, 2016, or was this 20? Yeah, this is 2015. Yes, 2016. Yes. I believe they do. I was never really the big Seth Smith fan. Leonis Martin, I think 2016 makes the playoffs.
I think 2017 does, because they actually had a decent offense, but their starting pitching was pretty much dead, because you had the only effective starter you really had was James Paxton, but you had a guy named Ariel Miranda, bad. Giovanni Gallardo, bad. Drew Smiley didn't even get to see the field because he was injured. Erasmo Ramirez, and then you had a broken Felix.
Right. So, 2017, you had a young Mitch Haniger who had a phenomenal year. Nelson Cruz is Nelson Cruz. Robbie Cano was Robbie Cano. But you got very good production from Mike Zunino that year. The first base position, I think it was Danny Valencia.
It was. He had 15 home runs.
Yeah, he was ish. I mean, he had an ish year, but that was still good enough. You had a very good Gene Segura, Kyle Seager. You even got production out of Ben Gamel.
Beautiful hair, Ben Gamel.
Yeah, which was surprising at most. The only problem was in center field, because you had the Dyson vacuum in center field. But outside of that, and you would think that Jerry DiPoto would do something for center field if they were there. I think 100% 2017 makes the playoffs.
And then I guess we'll end this off with 2018. Do they make the playoffs? You had Ryan Healy, Mike Zunino, D. Gordon. I mean, they won 89 games.
Right.
So I think they're going to make the playoffs with this, even with this offense, even with a suspended Cano.
It's interesting, right? Because, it's weird, because Mike Zunino took a dip, but he still gave you 20-44. Ryan Healy, I was not really the biggest fan of Ryan Healy, and he still
remember him at third base in 2019.
Yeah. And he still gave you 24-73. The problem was you had D. Strange Gordon playing second. You had Denard Span in left field, who actually ended up having a pretty solid year that year. But it was center field again with Guillermo Heredia. And you had Robbie Cano until he got suspended. But they also had Cameron Maven, didn't they?
They did have Cameron Maven, the biggest Scott Service
and they
critic.
brought Ichiro back for, I think Ichiro had 44 at-bats that year. Taylor Motter, yeah, okay. 2018, I'm going to say yes.
And let's just do this for fun. Let's do this last one. After the purge of the 2018 Mariners. Okay, let's do this. Like maybe like a first 2-month Mariners team. And I'll just do it off of that.
Well,
Omar Narvaez.
Yeah, the 2019 team.
The one that went 13-2, and I said that was the worst part of the 2019 season because it was a fraud. That was a fraudulent start. Everyone played above their heads. And Tim Beckham juiced heavy.
Yeah.
But here was the team, and we'll just do it like first 2 months team. Omar Narvaez, D. Gordon, Kyle Seager, Tim Beckham, Mitch Haniger before he got hurt. He had 15 home runs in 63 games. All-star Dan Vogelbach and Edwin Encarnacion, Tom Murphy, and Jay Bruce. With that core, and before you put in like Kyle Lewis, does that even squeak 500 or make the playoffs?
Oh no! Here I'm going to go out of the way and say not only does it makes the play, not even 2 months. I think it makes the playoffs. I mean, look at this, man. You had Omar Narvaez who had a very good year that year. 22 home runs, 50 RBIs. He hit 278 with an 813 OPS plus. Austin Nola, who didn't necessarily hit for the power that you want for first base, but he still finished with 1031, batted 269 and slugged 796. Even D. Strange Gordon, who still finished with a 275 batting average and a 304 OBP, 22 stolen bases. A young J.P. Crawford, Kyle Seager, who's still Kyle Seager. Domingo Santana came out of nowhere with a 2169 that year. Malik Smith, again, all you need is something serviceable in center field, and he was that. But Mitch Haniger, still Mitch Haniger at the time, and Daniel Vogelbach came out of nowhere that year. He still hit 208, but he still hit 3076. And on your bench, you had a good Tim Beckham, Edwin Encarnacion, who was still there. You have a young Dylan Moore. Tom Murphy had a hell of a year off the bench. 1840. Jay Bruce still gave you what he gave you. I understand that team after 13-2 kind of fell apart a little bit, but compared to this year, that offense is better than anything this offense puts out. That makes the playoffs now.
Yeah, the only problems were they had a broken starting rotation. Like your best starter was Marco Gonzalez and Yusei Kikuchi. And when that's when those two are your best starters, that's not making anything. Yeah. And the bullpen
makes the playoffs now.
The bullpen didn't even have a closer.
Right. That was the interesting thing because that actually was a very good offense. Like it's weird because home dude Jerry DiPoto. It's obvious he knows how to build an offense because he's built a couple from 2016 to 2019. That 2019 offense, I would take that offense over the one that we're seeing now. But for whatever reason, it's okay to trade Jack Zarenzik's prospects in order to improve because they're Jack Zarenzik's prospects. But for whatever reason, your prospects that you overvalue, you're not going to trade any of those prospects to bring in legit Major League Baseball players. You're going to nickel and dime it with platoons because you don't want to trade your prospects. We know how to build an offense because we've seen it in 2016 through 2019.
Yep. Well, that was actually kind of fun. 2014 going all the way to 2019. It's pretty interesting what we got out of it. And crazy thing, now the years, yeah.
You know what's funny? The 2021 Seattle Mariners, that 190, that had the
90 games.
Right. Compared it to 2019. This is your offense. Tom Murphy, who that year hit 202. Ty France, who actually came out of nowhere that year. Abraham Toro. J.P. Crawford. Kyle Seager in his last year. Jake Fraley, who hit 210. Jared Kelnick, who was a young rookie that year. Mitch Haniger, who had the best year of his career, and your DH is Luis Torrens. And your bench is Dylan Moore, Jake Bowers, Taylor Trammell, young Cal Raleigh appeared that year, Kyle Lewis, who was coming off the Rookie of the Year, Shed Long Jr., Evan White, Sam Swaggerty. You're gonna like that lineup. That horrible lineup still won 90 games.
They're making the playoffs because that's when their starting pitching wasn't exactly there yet.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like that horrible lineup still played over its head, still punched above its weight, and still won 90.
And they still had a pretty solid bullpen too, with the exception of Montero. I
would take the 2019 Mariner offense than that offense, and that team won 90 games.
It's pretty crazy what could have been in those years, but you know, I think unfortunately we're out of time because hashtag don't quit your day job. But everyone, thank you very much for being on this morning show, and Steve, thank you once again for being on this show.
Yes,
and we'll continue to do this as always. But anyways, let's hope the Mariners win the game.
By the way, do they win tonight, or do they win this afternoon?
Let's see if they're. Oh, we can talk about it just for a little bit. Man, this Mariners find ways to delay my life, but here's your lineup today. And it's going to disappoint. But J.P. Crawford is back. Julio Rodriguez center field. Cal Raleigh number 3. He's a DH, so they're taking a risk on that. So Castillo might actually have to hit if Mitch Garver gets hurt. Randy Arozarena, Jorge Polanco, Luke Raley, Dylan Moore, Mitch Garver, Victor Robles, and Luis Castillo. On paper, it has potential to score. I think they can cross 4 runs, maybe, but I still wanted to see Rodriguez and Arozarena sit. But Luke Raley is playing, Robles is playing, but I don't like the Garver and Raleigh combo.
All right, so give me that lineup one more time. So we have JP leading off,
Julio at center field,
batting second. Okay,
Cal Raleigh DH. I don't like that idea.
Okay.
Left fielder Arozarena.
Okay.
Second base Polanco. First base Raley. Third base Moore. Catcher Garver, which I don't like at all. And Victor Robles. I'd rather put in Justin Turner over Raleigh just to not risk injury and having to put Castillo as a hitter again.
So JP comes off the DL and he's an automatic leadoff hitter. Robles is batting last. Okay. And you have your middle of the lineup is Julio, Cal, Arozarena, and Raley. And of course, your bottom of the lineup now is going to be Dylan Moore, Mitch Garver, and Robles, huh? Well, it's going to be interesting to see how JP returns, but I will say that
I'm going to have to say lost because Mitch Garver's playing.
I don't like the idea of Cal Raleigh batting for third. I would actually go Arozarena second.
That's what I want.
Arozarena 2, Julio 3, Cal 4, Raley 5. And I would, you know what's funny is I would actually move Victor Robles up to 6 and drop Garver down to 9. Actually, I would put Dylan Moore 9th. And then I would have Robles 6. 7th would be Polanco. 8th would be Garver. 9th would be Dylan Moore.
All right. But I hate to say it, where I'm unfortunately out of time. But yeah, we'll see. Hopefully they will figure it out and win this game. Yep. But everyone, thank you very much for watching. And go Mariners.
Go Mariners.